This episode of the podcast is brought to you by, well, the podcast. This episode is actually the first in a series of episodes that have been recorded primarily for the podcast. This is an interview with a good friend of mine, Stephen Heiner, and it is a fascinating one where we dive into entrepreneurship and life design. And Stephen has a very cool story, including selling his business and then eventually moving to Paris, where he has been working 2 days a week. Yes, 2 days a week with multiple successful businesses. It is very cool. What I liked about the story and why I wanted to talk to Stephen is how he has been able to shed what one might call the typical North American attitude about life being nothing but money, and really adapted to living in France, and as I said, set up his life where he could surely make more money, but chooses to work 2 days a week instead and have a very balanced life. I know you're going to enjoy this one. I sure did. Stay tuned as well for part 2, where we have a fascinating chat together about changes in personality over time and how becoming an entrepreneur actually led Stephen to change his fundamental personality type because he had to. That was a very cool conversation as well. So enjoy the episode. So today, for the first time ever in Dreams Around the World history, we are doing an interview. And I'm very excited about this. We're talking to Stephen Heiner, who is a friend of mine. We've been in a business mastermind together for about a year. We have not yet actually met in person, although I'm sure that will happen soon enough. And Stephen lives in Paris, has for about 4 years, and there's a couple really cool things about his life and how he chooses to live his life that I thought would be awesome to talk about. I'm not going to say welcome. That sounds too much like I'm from BBC Radio or something. Welcome, Stephen. Tell us more about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. I'm probably one of those people who batch through your videos. I don't know how your regular listeners or viewers on your YouTube channel do it, but normally I'll save up like 5 or 6, right? And brushing my teeth or cooking something. And you had a really long one the other day, something like 30 minutes, and it got me all the way through dinner prep. So
awesome. That was a tough one to film. I put it up fairly recently, but I filmed it in August and it was boiling hot.
Right, I didn't know if your camera was trying to send you a message like, okay, we're not going to keep going.
No more here, no more. Give us maybe a bit of your background in terms of what you're doing now, but also maybe your story just a bit before that.
Sure. I am someone who did not know what an entrepreneur was, and I thought that being involved in business meant that you had to have a business degree. And these are the thoughts of a 18, 19, 20-year-old version of myself. I was at a liberal arts college. I would go on to eventually get a degree in literature many years later, actually not at that time. But I didn't know, I really had no direction. I couldn't tell you that this was going to be one thing or the other. But I was in the Marine Corps Reserve. I got activated after September 11th for some duty stateside, but I wasn't able to return back to college right away for a number of reasons. So I just finished my sophomore year, so I still had 2 more years to go. I moved back to California where my family was living. I was born in Singapore and we moved to the United States when I was 9 years old, so that's why I have this North American accent. And I started to get consistently fired from jobs. So by that I mean that I could interview well, present myself well, do a job, and I would last for however long it took before I broke some corporate rule that I didn't have enough common sense. So I believe that God distributes book sense and common sense in inverse proportion. So if he gives you a lot of common sense, you may not have a lot of book sense. Or if you have a lot of book sense, maybe you don't have a lot of common sense. I call it the Scrabble bowling score ratio. The higher your Scrabble score, the lower your bowling score, and the higher your bowling score. So you could look at it a number of different mathematical ratios, but mine was, I didn't realize I had to ask permission to come in early so that I could leave early if I got all my work done. Or if I came in late, that I would stay late. or I would take a long lunch and stay later. This was best exemplified years later. One of my students would tell me as I recounted a story. It was Friday around 3:30 in the office. And I started to go around to different departments saying, hey, do you need anything? I'm done for the day. They're like, no, Steven, that's fine. And so it got to be around, I'd gone around to 4 different departments. My boss was already gone. So I said, oh, well, I'm leaving. And a couple people looked at me and said, well, Steven, you can't leave. I said, what do you mean? I'm done with my work. I've asked everybody if they need any help. Like, I'm not going to sit at my desk for the next 90 minutes. They're like, you can't leave. I'm like, whatever. Left, got fired. And so as I'm recounting this story to my MBA students, I was teaching a class to MBAs on entrepreneurship. They more than half the class laughed really loudly when I said this, and all of them to a man or a woman said, Steven, you shouldn't have told anybody. You should have just said, hey, I'm going to go get a coffee and then gone. And I said, I wasn't around corporate America long enough to find out what the shorthand was. So as I kept getting fired from jobs, my temp agent, who would help me get these jobs, should say, Steven, have you ever thought of having your own business? You do things in a very odd way for an employee. And I said, no, I don't have a business degree. I don't know anything about business. And I really accidented into entrepreneurship because I was an SAT tutor. My friend had sent me a Monster.com listing when I was already in possession of 3 jobs that I wasn't getting fired from. Actually, I worked at a mortgage brokerage during the day.
I didn't know that. I was a mortgage broker too.
Not as a mortgage broker, just an admin. And then at 5 o'clock, I would drive to the Marriott and change into restaurant clothing, and I hosted at a restaurant in the evening. And then on the weekends, I was a concierge at the DoubleTree. And I actually liked this mix of jobs, but I was working like 90 or 100 hours a week. Like, I would go home, I would dream that I was at work, and then I would wake up and realize I had to go to work. So my friend sends me this Monster.com listing for SAT tutoring. And I said, Samurai, you realize I have 3 jobs already, right? He said, I just think you would like this more. And I went, and I really enjoyed it. It was a chance for me to get back, and in a combination of being funny, conveying information, but also affecting lives, I was starting to touch some of that beautiful fabric of entrepreneurship, of really doing something important. And it's like anything. When you graduate from dental school, you either buy a practice or you build a practice. And when you graduate from SAT training, wherever you do it, you have to build a practice or buy a practice. I started building a practice, and I started doing these things that had always served me well in my personal and professional life, but I didn't realize how transformative they would be in a business. So my mom always taught me to write thank you notes my whole life. And I started writing thank you notes to my tutoring clients. Well, apparently no one had ever written them thank you notes. Like, of all the people they utilized, and these are wealthy people who utilize their all kinds of things for their kids. But no one had, piano teachers, whatever. No one had ever written them thank you notes. I would write invoices. I would have gatherings, and I treated the students as people that I was genuinely interested in, because I was. And this basically blew up my practice. I didn't know I had a practice. I got promoted quickly at the Princeton Review. I ended up leaving the Princeton Review to build my own firm. Sort of the opposite of Jerry Maguire. I left with all of my clients, and I didn't leave any clients at the Princeton Review. And California having cloudy non-compete clauses, I was able to do it fairly legally. And interestingly enough, I'm friends. The gentleman who owned that company ended up selling his share back to Princeton Review for $30 million some years later, and we're friends. And he's actually one of my business mentors. And he told me years later, he said, Steven, if you had just come in and asked for, I don't know, quadruple your salary, I would have given it to you. And I said, I didn't have the maturity to know that, right? This goes back to, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? So because I didn't possess the professional or emotional maturity to go in there and ask for more money that I just left with all my clients, that allowed me to start this business. I left California, went to Kansas City, because I didn't like the lifestyle and the expense of Orange County. Moving to Kansas City, where I had some family nearby, my wealth instantly increased by 40% simply because of cost of living. And I put my nose to the grindstone, and 7 years later, I sold that company for, 10 times the amount that I and my investors had put in to start it. And that was the beginning of a huge change in my life, because the challenge with an entrepreneur who hasn't ever sold a business before is, I think he or she, and I'm just speaking for myself here, we have something to prove. I think that even though no one had put this chip on my shoulder, I had put it on myself that I needed to show that I could build something of value and someone else would buy it and would succeed. And that the golden, at the end of the golden rainbow, there's this pot of gold which would then allow me to do whatever it is I wanted to do. I remember reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, and Tim asking in the book that question of what is it that you want to do? Not what you want to, how you want to make money, but the question of what is it that you want to do? And I remember writing in my journal at the time, I want to sell this business, which was exactly the point, that business owners who haven't sold a company before, we may be tracked into, well, when I sell this business, then I'll get to do. It's like that scene from Heat when Robert De Niro talks about going off to see the iridescent algae in New Zealand. That's what he's going to get to do, what he really wants to do. And
it's similar with people retiring, I guess, day job mindset as well.
Right. And I was free to do that finally, and somewhere buried deep down. So we closed on October the 1st, but we still had a lot of business operations up until the October SAT and ACT. So we signed the check, we went out to a celebratory dinner, and the next morning I was an employee of the new owner, and all my staff stayed, and we were heading along. And then I started a series of vacations in November, one with my family, one with my banker and my business partners. But I went to Australia for a month. And in Australia, I wrote in my journal every day, what is it that you want to do with your life? Just trying to get through all of the detritus of email, telephone calls, and hustling. Like, I was very much in the Gary Vee hustle. Like, before Gary Vee made it cool, I was doing it, right? But I didn't know that it was cool. I just thought that that's what you're supposed to do. And underneath all of that, buried was, I really wanted to live in Europe. I hadn't ever spoken that to myself. Or if I had, I'd probably come up with 17 objections as to why. You don't have an EU citizenship. You don't know anybody there, or you only know a few people. You don't speak the languages very well. Whatever it was, I just kept telling myself, no, I was like, I sold a business. I'm not married, no dog, no cat, nothing. If you don't go now, you're not going to go. And so I came back from Australia. I bought a one-way ticket for 1 year in advance, and I started selling things and getting ready for the immigration part of it.
That's awesome. The one-way ticket approach is great, where you commit yourself in the future. I've used that as well. When it's, you're not ready in the moment, but what most people do is they put it off. They say, well, in 6 months I'll reevaluate. But of course, with fear comes in, they never do it. So when you actually buy that ticket, even if it's a year away, I'm guessing it changed it for you. The minute you bought that ticket, you knew you were going.
100%. And I have a friend who relocated from London to the United States. He's been in the United States 10 years now. And he said also that buying the ticket helped him work towards a goal. I remember, so I bought that ticket in January for December. And it was June. And I'm giving 90 days notice on my apartment. I'm starting to really do stuff. And I'm thinking, man, I wish I had more time. Keep in mind, I've already had 6 months. I'm going to have 6 more months. But in your brain, you're thinking, I wish I had more time. And I'm thinking, if I hadn't bought the ticket already, I would have
pushing it.
And that's the whole thing is, if your listeners or your viewers are familiar with Parkinson's Law, it's something that I really embrace as a way to help my workflow. And that is the idea that our brain deals with deadlines that are closer much better than ones that are farther away. That is to say, if I say I need you to write this term paper in the next 4 days, you're going to do a much better job than if I say you need to write this term paper in the next 4 months. Your brain just doesn't know what to do with all that extra time. You don't need 4 months to write a term paper. I'm sorry. You don't. And what I didn't realize in school, when all our teachers were making us feel guilty for being procrastinators, they were just ignorant of Parkinson's Law. The idea that any student of any age is going to start on a paper 4 or 6 months in advance is crazy. And the same thing, too, as you're doing, I didn't need a year to move. In fact, the French immigration authorities don't allow you to apply for a visa more than 90 days out. So you have to keep in mind, I've been doing all this work for 9 months. As I start to head into this 90-day window, what did the French tell me? No. Like, what am I gonna do? I've moved out of like for my final 90 days, I was crashing on different friends' couches because I didn't want to move out of an apartment and out of the country on the same day, right? So I staggered it so that I had already disposed of furniture long before my leaving the United States. So having that, if you're serious about it, I can't emphasize enough, buying the one-way ticket, it commits you. And even, look, let's say you miss it, we'll buy another ticket. But the point is, you're moving towards a deadline, and that's helpful in life in general, not just for a major life move like an intercontinental one.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I was filming a video earlier today, and I was talking about that same thing. When I quit a job before, believe it or not, I know, and what I did is I'd wanted to leave it, but I was scared. I didn't have enough money. What would I wasn't ready to start my own business, which was all BS in retrospect because my boss screwed me out of my last money. So I ended up not making any more money when I stayed there for 4 more months. But what I did is I wrote a letter to 3 different friends of mine in 3 different countries. So one was in Chile, one was in New York, and one was in Vancouver. I told them each they were the only person receiving this letter, and I gave them my boss's and the owner of the company's contact info and a letter to send basically saying, like, fuck off, I don't want to work here, that sort of thing. And I made them commit that they would send it, whatever the date was, on June 15th, no matter what. Like, even if I begged or pleaded that they had to send it.
So you said a dead man switch.
Exactly. And what was really cool about it is I had all this stress. It's a feeling I have trouble remembering now, but this like stress you get of just like dread. Like you have this job you don't want to do, whatever that is. And I had this feeling, and the minute I sent that letter to them, the feeling left as if I'd already quit the job. Because I had changed, it's like some weird Leonardo DiCaprio movie where you change the future by taking that one action. So no matter what you do, you will be quitting by that time.
Sure. You've talked about this in your videos before, that this is also deceptive in a bad sense, that when you say you're going to make a change, you get the dopamine hit of having made it. I'm going to lose weight this year. Oh, cool. And you tell all your friends, you're like, oh, I've already done it, so I don't need to do it. Right?
Well,
so
see,
what
you need to do...
you sometimes, too. You have to be careful.
Yeah. Well, in that case, let's say it's losing weight. What you need to do is commit to your friends and then get them to commit to shooting you in the face if you don't do it. And then, then it's a true dead man switch.
Wait, I'm the American here. I'm supposed to be talking about guns and violence here. The Canadian's supposed to be the peaceful one of the conversation.
I listened to a lot of hip-hop as a teenager. So you eventually found yourself in Paris. Tell me a bit about this, like your last couple years, what life is like.
It's been 4 of the most challenging and most rewarding years of my life. So I talk about different phases, and that prior time period, that 7-year stretch in which I built and sold a company, that was up to that point the most rewarding and challenging of my life. And then you level up, right? And so now try doing that all again in a different language in a country in which you don't have citizenship. So what can I say? I can say that France is probably the most anti-business country in Europe. I can say that when President Bush infamously said that the French don't have a word for entrepreneur, he actually was correct, right? That it's a French word, but it's a North American concept. This idea of building your own business and taking a risk is unknown to the French mind, which is traditionally risk averse. Now, this isn't to say there isn't a cool French startup scene and there aren't some awesome French tech startups. This is true, but they're venture backed by US money. So it isn't as if the French are necessarily going all in on this themselves with their own venture money. I am here for the lifestyle. When I think about French life, I'm not here because I want to build some amazing business. Like, this is not the country to do that. Germany, so Berlin, the Netherlands, maybe Prague. There are better places to incubate, Estonia, better places to incubate and build a business, right? If you're in France, it's not because we have some great business thing, although the current president may change that. We're here because the lifestyle is unbelievable. Let me think of 2 or 3 the examples. The first one I can think of is that the entire country is on vacation for about 6 weeks during the summer. So after Bastille Day, which is a traditional, the gun goes off essentially, don't expect to get in contact with anybody until September 1st. So between July 14th and September 1st, what the French call le rentrée, which is the beginning, so everyone's back to school, work, etc., that's 6 weeks of, well, Jean-Pierre's not in the office. He's gone in the Himalayas or whatever else. The idea,
wife swapping somewhere around Marseille.
Who knows? But this idea that vacation is so important, and going back probably to if we go to the Latin of recreation, right? Recreare, to recreate. This idea of going someplace to regenerate yourself. Not to just go watch endless seasons of some TV show, but to just relax, be out in the sun, go to the mountains. People go to the ocean or they go to the mountains in France. That's how it works. And that is a national priority. Americans look at that and we're just, and I don't know if Canadians have the same attitude, but Americans are astonished. And they're trying, what happens is their brain is trying to, justify their emotional reaction. Yes. Their emotional reaction's like, there's a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind, which talks about this behavior, and he likens it to an elephant and a rider, right? So you're given some situation, you're not told anything other than the situation. So the famous example he uses in the book is that a man has a chicken, he then does something sexual with the chicken, and then he eats the chicken. And he asks people, why is this is wrong? And most people responded, yes, absolutely, this is wrong. And then, so that's the elephant. The elephant is saying, I gut feeling don't like this. And then the rider is trying to justify it, right? Like, well, I don't like it because, right? And then, of course, that's a different conversation we can have about why it may
why we shouldn't have sex with chickens. That right. Coming up later on the podcast, right. We'll dive into.
That's what we call the bonus segment. But
this is the bonus.
But the issue there too is an American, and again maybe a Canadian might have similar.
We are the same. We have less holidays than you guys.
So our reaction is that's outrageous / ridiculous. That's the elephant. The rider is then having to say, but why do I think that that's ridiculous? And so the way that I will push my North American friends here is they'll say, I can't believe that store's closed during lunch, right? With this sort of huffy tone. And I'll say, right, because it's ridiculous that anyone else would deserve to have lunch at a regular time other than you, right? This crazy idea that the reason those shops are closed is so that those people can have lunch. They're not off like frolicking in the garden. Like, they get to have lunch at a regular time like everyone else is. It's just because Americans are so pressed for time that they have to use their lunch hour to run errands. Yeah. That's the crazy idea, right? So here in France, these things that would to a North American sound absolutely absurd. Your country takes 6 weeks off. The whole entire country is gone on vacation. Yep, the entire country's gone. You mean those stores are not open between 12 and 2? Yep. You mean restaurants close at 2:30? Yes, because why the hell would you try to eat lunch at 3 o'clock? Like, what do servers need to sit around 24 hours waiting for you to show up? So the idea of life as something that is primary and work as something as secondary is an inversion for an American. For an American, money and work and whatever is first, and then family, whatever else is afterwards.
I always find really interesting with that, I got into this conversation with my dad when I was visiting back home. If you look at GDP, so GDP is gross domestic product. It's basically one way to assess the value a country makes, right? If you look at the GDP per capita per person in a place like France, it is lower than the United States, but not significantly when you consider the lifestyle benefits. And if you look at the life of the average person and what they're actually their day-to-day experience is in that, compared to slight differences in the economy. It's not so slight, maybe it's 10 or 20% lower per capita, but you consider that with the lifestyle, why is someone working that hard the way most North Americans do in terms of a lack of vacation, a lack of free time in the evenings? so that this number can be slightly higher. There's arguments as well that the reason GDP is higher in the US is everything is artificial. Like no one makes their own sauces or cooks at home or all that, so they spend more money, but they're not actually, getting more from it. But the logical thought, even when I look at that, it's impossible to justify. Like,
it is, but that's the thing is the power of culture is such a massive influence on the way we are. We like to think we're independent thinkers, etc. But when you're surrounded by a culture that reinforces the dominant paradigm, it's really hard for you to... I'd say the same thing. I was used to being the odd person at a cocktail party in the United States when I would openly question our foreign policy, right? And I don't think it's the same because Canadians don't take themselves so seriously. But one of the worst insults you can give to an American is to call them un-American. Because America has this, because it has no religion, it made itself its own religion. So the Constitution is the sacred scripture, and the flag is a sacred element, and so if you are calling someone un-American, you're saying that they don't subscribe to the American religion, and it's a terrible thing. So when you're in that environment, you just feel like the unpopular kid at a cocktail party. But when you're away, when you live on a different continent, and you're able to look back at those events with a dispassionate, even you're removed, and like, well, I don't live there. I don't have to accept the tax policy, the foreign policy, any of that, because I don't live here. You realize how absurd it is, even more so. But when you're in a cultural environment that reinforces that paradigm, it's really hard to ask people to think differently. So in a certain sense, I understand if Americans take what I'm saying with a lot of... that the elephant gets really upset. If you and I are talking about this, I can imagine a lot of people, either they've already hit stop on the video and thrown the iPad across the room, or they don't know why they're aggravated. But I'm telling you, it's because your culture is telling you that I'm crazy, that the stuff that we're talking about is nuts. And I understand that, but really dig deeper and say, but why is it nuts though? Is it really nuts that it's crazy to think your job should be the center of your life? There's a Guardian article today about the 5 regrets of the dying, and not one of them. These are the 5 most frequently reported regrets of the dying, and none of them I wish I'd worked for. Not one, surprisingly.
So, if anyone is still watching and doesn't hate you yet for your lifestyle, let's talk about how many days a week you work and how you spend your time. Because this is the original reason I wanted to talk to you on this, because I find it very inspiring, and I'm also jealous because you have an ability also to fill your free time that I need to develop. I was going to say I'm lacking, but I suppose I just need to develop it, where you really, at least from what I see, get a lot out of life in terms of spending your time. So maybe share your work week. I'm guessing you work, 6 days a week, 12-hour days? What's this look like?
That's my evil twin brother who listens to Gary Vee nonstop. I want to address that, but just to ride on a little bit of what you were saying, Dan, I listen to the Minimalists a lot. I have a lot of time for them. And on their podcasts, a lot of people will call in and say, basically ask for tips about how to find their passion or how to get a hobby. Yeah. And I'm not laughing at them. I'm laughing at a society that has so far departed from leisure that we have to ask other people for how to get a hobby. Like, how do I start having a passion? And you run into this in your coaching business. Again, I'm not laughing at those people. I'm laughing at the situation that we have washing machines to do our work. We have all of these things, and we lack the moral imagination. We lack the
to fill in the free time.
Right. It's unbelievable. So to your question about the envy or jealousy of my work week. So I told you that I used to work these 80, 90-hour weeks when my short-lived life as an employee. And then during my hustle years when I built my first business that I sold, I was working, let's say, 100-hour weeks in the first year, and then it went down from there, let's say 90-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks, etc. But the idea of the work week is something we really have to think is invented by the Industrial Revolution, right? So for thousands of years of civilization and human history, this idea, I go to work at this time, I'm done with work, and then even further that I retire at this age, these are all new things. There are there used to be people older than these concepts, but these concepts are not much older than some of our grandparents. But these are all around this idea of I'm going to put a widget in here, I'm going to do it for 8 hours, I'm going to leave. But the idea that an 8-hour work week translates across the board, right? It's so insidious that so we have to have 8-hour school days. Why? Why do we have to have an 8-hour school day? I'm sorry. Can you recall one meaningful thing that you learned between 1st and 8th grade? Other than you started to realize that girls weren't made out of spiders anymore, right? And I didn't need to go to school to figure that out. So 8 hours.
Wait, girls aren't made out of spiders?
We'll tell your girlfriend.
Maybe I can lose my virginity this year now. I have arachnophobia, so this is great.
So you have this 8-hour thing imposed on everything, but no one stops to think, how absurd is it to think that a graphic designer and an insurance salesman share the same block of time of necessary work on a daily basis? This goes back to the rules of why I kept getting fired when I tried to be an employee. This idea of, well, if you find a better way to do things, why would you... So one of the things that I tried with my employees was telling them, I'm contracting with you not for 40 hours a week, but for these set of tasks. And if you complete these set of tasks sooner and you want to go home, as long as we've got phone coverage, someone's in the office, that's cool. And you can work it out with your fellow employees. But I wasn't going to punish them by then saying, oh, you're done early, Dan? Well, how about you start compiling these TPS reports too? Right? I wasn't going to do that. What I said was, if you want to take on additional work, let's talk about that, but that's going to come with additional pay. But that allowed my employees to innovate without penalty, right? So it meant that, well, maybe we started with 40 hours worth of work, but maybe over time it was 33 hours, and then they got a promotion, and then maybe it got bumped up again. But that's just us trying to keep up with our cultural straitjacket. I must work 8 hours, I must work this. So you and I both know that when you're in flow state, when you're working and you're grinding, you don't even know how much time has passed. Chris Rock talks about this rather famously when he was working at Red Lobster. He'd scrub, and he said, I'm not going to look at the clock. I'm not going to look at the clock. Scrub. Oh, it's been 3 minutes, right? Those are the days you'd go to the bathroom.
Oh, I remember those jobs.
Right, you'd go to the bathroom to avoid being at your desk. Like, wow, Dan's really having a tough time. He's been in the bathroom 20 minutes. Don't know what's going on.
How much joy did you get from just like a walk to the coffee machine? It was heavenly. It was like, I just used up 5 minutes. I'm 5 minutes sooner to freedom.
Right. So Chris Rock talks about this idea, the difference between your project and your job. And he says, when you have a project, there aren't enough hours in the day. You know, you're working, you look up and you're like, wow, it's 6 o'clock already. Well, I still got to keep working. Right? That shift happens because of meaningful work, right? And you've talked about this before on many of your videos, but most people are not given that because they were forced into this cultural paradigm. So when I was free to recreate my life here in France, I didn't move here to simply replicate my American life. I was willing to challenge what it was I was doing. So I happen to be a content creator, so I write, I've got a few businesses, but one of them is that I create content in English for digital properties, both here and in the United States. And so that doesn't require me to work Monday through Friday. It doesn't require me to work Saturday or Sunday. It doesn't actually require me to work any days of the week other than to meet deadlines, either self-imposed because I've created a workflow with my client, or exteriorly imposed, like we just recently placed a piece with Success Magazine, and that was something that we had to work for on a certain deadline. So the challenge is that when you're free to do that, some people don't, we're sort of paralyzed. Well, I'll start with, okay, I'm going to go to work on Monday and I'm going to start at 8 o'clock. And I just went with my rhythms. I'm a night person, not a morning person. So I don't do any meetings or any work before noon. Right? Because I know I'm not going to make them. I'm going to show up bleary-eyed, not at my best, not professional. So I never take meetings before noon, ever, on any day of the week. And I don't go into the office until noon. When I am at the office, I work until that day's tasks are done. So in my case, that's Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm in the office, let's say, from 12 to 8, or 12 to 5, or 12 to 4, however long it is. When that's done, that's done. Wednesdays are a reading day, because as a writer, I believe that for every 1 page of good prose, you should have 10 pages of good reading that you've read. So I consider that a work day as well, but it's just reading. So I'm not allowed to do any personal errands. I'm not allowed to, pick up dry cleaning, do grocery shopping. I still consider it a work day, but it's just reading. And then recently, we talked about this before the show, but on Thursdays, I've added a day which I just dedicated to non-revenue writing. This is writing I do for fun, to share with my friends. I have a blog called The American in Paris, which chronicles my immigration journey, which is also it's turned into a side hustle. I didn't plan it that way, but that non-revenue writing was getting pushed out to the margins, and I wanted to reclaim some time. So I made Thursdays my day for love writing, non-revenue writing. Fridays I take meetings, or I do interviews like our call today. Saturdays I have social set aside for my friends, somewhat Sunday as well. Sunday's a very quiet day. But by segmenting my week, I know what's going on instinctively without having to flip out and look at my calendar. I don't have to go, oh, what's going to go on tomorrow? Well, it's Tuesday, which means I'm going to be working.
Yeah.
And I think that's fun too, because we can transport some of those old habits like, well, I have to put everything in my calendar. It's like, well, that's true, but what if you just knew what you were going to do every day? Well, that would be easier. I wouldn't need to rely so much on a calendar. And that's a lot of, that's very helpful for my workflow as well.
It's something that a lot of people don't understand, including myself for the longest time, is the more discipline and structure you give yourself, the more actual freedom and enjoyment you end up feeling and experiencing, I would say. Like, you are someone with a lot of rules for yourself. You were saying, I can't do this on these days or that on that day. But ultimately, I imagine that gives you a lot more emotional and creative freedom, because you're not always thinking about, what do I do today, or stressed out. You have your structure, and then within that, you have a lot more like freedom or fun or whatever else that is.
Have you? You're saying an idea that recently came out in book form by Jocko Willink. I'm sure you're familiar. Do you know Jocko? Tim Ferriss has had him on. He has his own podcast.
Yeah, I've heard one of his interviews. Yeah.
But he has a new book that just came out, I think, last week called Discipline Equals Freedom, Field Manual. Right?
He stole that from me.
He did. Long before Jocko was using it, Dan was using it. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that yes, discipline equals freedom. Because I've hemmed myself in, it means I'm free. Because I've said Mondays are a work day, it means I'm free to go all out on Mondays. And I don't have to worry about meetings. I don't have to worry about, do I have an interview with Dan today? No, I don't, because it's Monday. I can't possibly have an interview with Dan today. It frees you up. And it's a bit of the, although I don't entirely buy into this decision fatigue that Tim Ferriss talks about, it does remove having to make decisions on a daily basis, because you know the theme of the day, like Mondays are this, Tuesdays are this. And again, I'm not saying that anybody needs to do what I'm doing. I'm just arguing, use what you know about yourself to your benefit. The reason I start later is because I know I'm not a morning person. You could do the inverse. Maybe you're a morning person and you start at 5 a.m. and you're done at noon. Cool. Yeah. But leverage what you know about yourself. We have so many cool tools, whether it be Myers-Briggs or whatever else, to know what makes us work. And that's what we should be using in our modern technological age, where we have all these machines that do things for us, is leverage that self-knowledge to make an ideal work environment for yourself. We're going to have to work, so it might as well be something pleasurable, and to Chris Rock's point, more of a project than where I have to go to the bathroom to avoid being at my desk.
So you mentioned the different days, but just to break it down for people, essentially the core of your work, not the education and development parts like reading and that, but the core of your, I guess, production work, you work essentially 2 days a week. You work Monday and Tuesday.
Correct.
And then you are reading, you are doing other things, which whatever kind of entrepreneur, creative person you are, you can't forget about. We need stimulation, right? We need that time off. The tax authorities don't agree if you're like trying to write off, well, I needed to go to the bar and relax so that tomorrow I'd be a better writer. They don't seem to let you write that off. But so what were some of the challenges, whether that was internally in your own head or externally, of saying essentially I work Monday and Tuesday? Like, you flip the traditional work week from take 2 days off to work 2 days. Right.
I think, again, there's a scene, and I stopped watching Downton Abbey after the second season, I think, but there's a very funny line. Maggie Smith says, she's an old school aristocrat. and someone had said, "Oh, I think I'll come back on the weekend." He's more bourgeois, and he's trying to adapt to the fact that he's coming into this aristocratic money. And he says, "Oh, I think I'll do this on the weekend." And she says, "What, pray tell, is a weekend?" Right? Because this idea that Saturday and Sunday is this time. I sort of channel Maggie Smith in that, what pray tell is a weekend? Again, this is this idea that someone has imposed on you that dates from the Industrial Revolution. If we look back to medieval times, let's think about farmers, because we always think farmers that work really hard. That's true, but if you look at the peak of production at the time before you went to all of this mechanization, farmers worked about 165, 166 days a year. Why? Well, because you can't work when it's a blizzard outside or when it's not time for growing stuff, right? Farmers are working on something else. Maybe they're moving hay around or other stuff, but there was a limit on how much you could work. The medieval mind knew this. It didn't think, oh, you know what I need to do? Since I'm not working, I need to be doing more work. So I think at first when people would ask about my work schedule and it would come across in casual conversation, the big challenge was trying to explain it to someone in a way that didn't make me seem like a jerk, because people would react poorly to it right away, like, oh, must be nice, right? And I think to myself, when someone says must be nice, how much more that says about them than it says about me, right? Like, I'm not trying to get to any level of income that they may or may not know about.
Yeah.
But, I mean, what does that mean when you say must be nice?
Well, this is a big difference where people, when you tell them about your life, whether it's living abroad or traveling or working less, you have two kinds of people. The must be nice or the tell me more. How did you do that?
I wish I met more of those tell me more people. I would say those tend to be 1 or 2 out of every 10 people. But I would say 8 out of 10 are the must be nice. I would subdivide that. The must be nice, they kind of, they're a bit more prickly. And then the I sure wish, they're the softer version. I can go somewhere with the I sure wish people because I can push them and say, do you really wish that? Because if you do, I'm not special. Like, I worked hard and I hustled to get here, but are you saying that I'm better than you? Or are you saying that? And then I can push them a little bit more. But the must be nice people can sometimes be very dismissive, and you can't really engage them that way. So part of the challenge for me was just the cultural blowback. Even here, talk about a country with a 35-hour work week. Even the French would switch into must be nice mode, and they're the epitome of not working. I mean, they're not as bad as the Spanish or the Greeks, but that's another conversation. But part of it is explaining, but part of it too is your own cultural baggage. The straitjacket I was talking about earlier, you've lived that straitjacket for however many years, so now you're going to tell yourself, like, well, no, I'm done on Tuesday. What was fascinating and what I found as an unexpected side effect was, since Tuesday is my Friday, to put it in traditional terms, it meant that I couldn't leave the office until my stuff for Tuesday was done. Because it's like, well, I'm not going to come back to the office until Monday, the office, whatever that is. And that meant there's a good urgency. It's like, well, if you only have 2 days to work, you're going to make the most of it. You don't have the luxury of having an extra 3 days to finish this. Why? Well, because I've got reading to do. I'm sorry. And what happened was, things that we kick off to the side as unimportant, which are really the things we live for, like going to museums, taking time for yourselves, having a coffee with a friend. We kick that off into the long grasses. Oh, well, work takes priority. It's like, no, I'm sorry. It's equal. Meaning my work is as important as my time with my friends. Well, what that means is you then have to manage them, and you can't kick them off into the long grass anymore and just say, well, I'm sorry, I got to cancel my coffee with my friend because I've got this work. So, sorry, no, I've got coffee with my friend, so I've got to finish this work project. So it's a battle within yourself to adjust. It's a battle with other people when you try to explain. But also to yourself, how am I working? I think you're someone who sometimes works from home. I do not have that discipline. My home is very much built for comfort. So I go to co-working spaces, and they really help. The people around me really give me energy. I see a bunch of people tapping away at keyboards. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get some work done today. So I rarely go to a co-working space and do not get a lot done. Even when I'm traveling to other countries, I will pay and go to a co-working space and get a lot done. So those are probably the 3 big things. Adjusting myself, explaining it in a way to people that makes them feel like it's possible for them as well. Even within their corporate job, I will try to brainstorm with people. Okay, tell me about your work. Okay, could you do this? Could you do this? To not saying that they need to be like me at all, but how can we work with what you have right now to give you a little bit more freedom? And then, so how you do your work, explaining to people, and then battling within yourself. Those are maybe 3 things that I could reflect on to your question.
I think for me, the biggest challenge there is always the internal battle. And like you said, I know when I have a deadline. I was talking to a friend the other day about this, where if I had to finish my work every day by, say, 2 p.m., I definitely could. And the times I do have deadlines or plans in the evenings or things like that, I'm much more efficient and effective. But what I'm working on developing is, in a place like Prague, is how to fill my evenings or fill my afternoons that doesn't involve beer.
Well, that's hard. Especially in a place like Prague where beer is cheaper than water, right?
Literally, and I'm not someone, I love my work, and so that's always, for better or worse, I need to develop some hobbies to fill that time in the evening and do different things. So maybe it's picking up a few new sports or something like that, because you're totally onto it. It is that Parkinson's Law coming into play, and then this whole 80-20 rule concept where, 20% of your action gets 80% of the results. That tends to force itself to happen when you have deadlines. So if I have 10 minutes to go through my emails, I'll just whiz through them. Really, I'll get the inbox clear. But if I have unlimited time, then I overthink. I write longer answers than necessary. And if you ever write to sort of very successful entrepreneurs or executives, you tend to notice you get 1 to 3 sentence email replies. And it's not them being cold or not caring about you. It's just they're getting their stuff
they're
done.
batching. They're batching.
Yeah.
They've got 10 emails before yours and another 70 after. So to your point, Dan, can I recommend something? Again, when you're in flow mode, you can take stuff that works in business and apply it to your life, and take stuff in life and apply it to your business. And I would recommend going on offense. And what I mean by that is, I look at the clients that I have now and the work that I do is because I went on offense. I didn't wait for the clients to roll to me. I came up with innovative ways and presented it to my clients, and they decided to work with me after I gave value. Think about the things that you enjoy doing and consider, and I don't know if there's a lot of presence for meetup.com in Prague or some other similar sites, of going after what it is that you're interested in. If you're a person who likes to go to the movies, likes to go out to eat places, someone who likes to play soccer.
Schedule that first, sort of beginning of the week schedule.
And if you don't find a meetup, create your own and see who shows up, right? So one of the things, and again, this is the go on offense mentality, I'd like to visit museums in Paris. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could find other nerdy friends who want to visit museums in Paris. Well, on the first Sunday of the month, a lot of the museums are free. So what I did was I created a group on Meetup in which we would meet on first Sundays. We'd have breakfast together so we get to know these strangers, and then we'd go to a museum together. And that was, 26 museums ago. So all of a sudden, 2-3 years later, you've gone to all these museums, you've made all these friends, and it was because you came up with an idea and other people happen to be interested in that as well. So what is it you do? You like playing pickup soccer? Do you like taking and try some and fail, just like business. So I tried a late night slow walks in Paris, right? So we would just sort of wander through the streets at night. And we had like 3 or 4 meetups, amazing walks. Didn't really get a lot of momentum. Like it started with like 5 people, and then 1 or 2 people were showing up. So I killed it. Same thing with, I had a casual chess club. And the problem was people of too many varying levels were playing.
Yeah.
And someone with a high chess score doesn't want to play someone with a low chess score. And so that one died. But in even trying those, just like businesses, you learn from the failures. And I killed it quickly as well. Like I wasn't going to have a long lingering death. But I was finding those people. I went on offense in my personal life as well. And I made some really great friends and continue to have some really great experiences. But Technology is there to help us find. I think meetups. Maybe its motto is find your people, and I buy into that wholeheartedly because I've met some really great friends from Meetup.
That's a very good call. Very good call. Yeah, scheduling in advance, making it happen. I like it. I've taken notes. I will implement this. One thing you do very well that I don't is in terms of integration with where you are. So you've went all in with France, right? You have long-term residency. You speak French. You're as a local. Versus some people, not me, I obviously speak fluent Czech, but I've heard there's other expats who just try to get by on English and don't necessarily properly integrate and instead pay locals to do their translation work and papers for them. I don't know who would do that. That sounds really American.
In defense of anybody who would do that, Dan, and again, of course, that's not you. Czech is not an easy language. On the scale, if you look at how many hundreds of hours, French, Italian, Spanish are in the 200 to 300 hours range. Czech, Slovak, that is in the 400 to 500 hours range. Beyond that is Hungarian. Beyond that's Russian, and beyond that's Korean and Japanese. So, for anyone who did choose to live in Prague, they were not picking the easiest place for language. So I wouldn't beat up on them too much for that.
That's fair. I'll talk to them and let them know that it's okay, the choices they've made. So there's one other thing I wanted to chat with you about, and I think what we'll do is we'll split this into a second episode, or maybe a third. I don't know how we'll split these up yet, actually. But it's about a conversation we had the other week about Myers-Briggs and personality types, and how when we first met, you identified yourself. I'd say that like I identified myself. Well, we had this mastermind. So as part of the mastermind, we eventually talked about like, what personality types are you guys? Because it's a decent thing to know.
And then, but by the way, this is before we found out that Dan had done 7,000 videos on ENFPs. By the way.
Hey, there's 6 on INFPs as well. And so you identified yourself as an ENTJ. And then we had a conversation maybe a year later where you told me that you were actually an ENFP.
A retired
You'd always tested as an ENFP before. And so with that teaser hanger, we will save that for the next episode. So let's end this for those listening on the podcast. Yes, that's what we do. Be sure to head over to iTunes and leave a nice review if you've enjoyed this. If you are watching on YouTube and you've made it this far, first of all, amazing. Secondly, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And we'll catch you in the next episode, which we will link up from here when that is up as well.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. As I said at the beginning, this is actually the first interview that I have done for the podcast, or actually in general. I don't do a lot of interviews on my YouTube channel or here on the podcast, and I'm really going to start doing it. What I enjoyed about it is a lot of the things you were learning about Stephen, I was learning about him too, despite us being in a business mastermind for about a year together. So having these interviews is pretty cool. You get to really get to know people. Stay tuned. The next episode, we're going to be diving into this personality transformation that Stephen went through. It's really fascinating and can shed a lot of light on personality type and development and how we can change with time based on what life demands of us.